All right, so here we are again. Elvire, Pete, welcome.
Thank you.
And Mike, we were on the other panel earlier today. This is one of my preferred subject matter, what I call S2PC, Smart and Sustainable Port City. Pete, in Antwerp, lots of things is happening right now on energy transition, and we discussed it this morning. You see really very interesting partnership with the port and city as a port to be a source of energy for the city, right?
Yeah, but maybe to go back, and Pascal, you know, we have been merging with between the port of Zeebrugge and the port of Antwerp a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
Which was kind of historic moment, but going back a long time in history to the 15th and 16th century. Bruges was in the 15th century a major capital of the world even, and which was powered by the port. Antwerp was the same in the 16th century, and which was looking to the relation between port and city that ended for both of them quite abruptly. One was due to limited access to the port in Bruges, and Antwerp, it was due to the war. So you see how important that symbiosis between ports and cities are to raise, but also to fall. So looking to the current situation, we are living in quite turbulent times, and I think a key priority, it has been discussed already today, is that energy transition. And I think also there have a close relation between the city and the port, because I really believe that ports are and should be providers of sustainable energy to cities where you have a massive high concentration of people who need a massive amount of energy. Not only like in Antwerp, the industrial cluster needs a lot of energy, but also the people in the houses and the cars need that. And I think we try to work on that in Antwerp to create that sustainable, and in Zeebrugge, of course, that sustainable energy. For instance, there is a heat network which is in construction actually. Now it's in the first phase within the port. We make a connection between an industrial incinerator which is present there, to board malt, which is the largest malt creator. You know, the Belgians like beer, yeah. So it's the biggest producer of malt, which is one of the basic products of beer, of course. And they will use the residual heat for their processes. But that heat network will also be connected by 26 to the city. And there, by 2030, more than 30,000 households will receive heat from the port. There's even a plan up to 2050 that about 50% of the population in Antwerp should be connected to that network. Another example, windmills. I think Bruges and Antwerp together, it's the largest onshore windmill park in Belgium. So also there, more than 200,000 families can use sustainable energy from that. We have a lot of solar panels. So, and of course, green hydrogen has been discussed a lot today. I think we will not, in the first phase, bring that immediately into the homes. It will be mainly used for shipping and industrial activities. But later on, if that's further evolving, it could also be a source of sustainable energy.
But I mean, in the landscape of Antwerp Bruges, you have been trying and implementing different sources of energy, you know, between the port and the city. In the audience today, we have 94 countries, 20,000 people viewing here. You know, for a country in Latin America or in Africa or Southeast Asia would start that journey of energies between the port and city, what could be your recommendation? Where should I start? Should I start windmill? Should I start, you know, heat? What?
There is a very easy and cheap solution: energy efficiency. Start there. Because all the energy you don't use, that's the cheapest one. So I think, and you see it happening now with the energy crisis, which is a bit unfortunate and coming too fast. But there's a lot of effort now put on energy efficiency, because you can make massive savings there on all kinds. Putting the heating lower, putting the air conditioning a little bit higher, changing your lighting, and so on. So that can make a structural big difference. Looking And of course, it's very much depending on situation and location to location. I'm just coming back, by the way, from 1 week visiting Azerbaijan, which was a very specific situation. It's a big oil and gas producer, but if you're in the countryside, you see very limited energy availability. So everything is concentrated in the cities, and we should be careful with that. Of course, the relation between city and port is important, but we should also not forget the countryside. So take care of that, and I can imagine that in rural areas in Africa, we probably have to use solar panels, which become every day cheaper, and which are an easy way to produce energy. Windmills in some other areas where you have enough wind. So it will be a combination. But of course, Western Europe is a big user of energy.
Yeah. Thank you, Pete. Elvire, we discussed earlier today about your different initiatives that you have on sustainable energy in Gothenburg, but there is one specific, which is the Transzero initiative on building the electric infrastructure for trucks, right? But you have about 1.2 million trucks still going around the port area. You have moved away from many of them. However, for the last 20 years, I think 67 is rail, right? And you had a big increase recently, I mean, the last 5 years, 15 or 17% more, moving rail, but you still have 1.2, and the issue is to build the infrastructure, right? Where the cities and the port and all the ecosystem need to be embarked, right?
Absolutely. First of all, it's not just Belgians that like beer, Pete. So I'm very glad that you are using beer for something more than just to drink it. So that's super. But kidding aside, Pascal, I think so the symbiosis between cities and ports. You mentioned our Transzero initiative, and we did that in combination with local parties in Sweden, companies such as Volvo, a shipping company called Stena Line, and another trucking company called Scania. Mm-hmm. The idea is pretty simple. It is to narrow down and scope down these 1.2 million trucks and create infrastructure in combination with a business model, much like the ones, Mike, that you have in LA, so that we start a transition. The goal is to have these trucks run on alternative energy, hydrogen, and direct electricity, and replace the old trucks. Now, I'm super excited about that because already next year we have more than 110 trucks that will serve the Gothenburg port area, picking and delivering containers that will run on electricity. This is super. However, I do feel that the symbiosis between the city and the port here in the future could be a challenge, not just locally in Gothenburg. Why? Because we will all end up fighting for the same electricity. We will share the resources that the city needs, that the inhabitants and the households in the city need. And as we electrify our business model, as we turn more green, as we force or as we have ships that come to and connect to shore power supply, our grid expansion is bigger. And then we start competing for the same grid that the city has. And not just the households, but also the other industry bases in the cities that are also going green. So I think being a smart port in that sense is making the best use. You talked about energy efficiency, Pete. I couldn't agree more. Figure out how do we handle these resources in the best way. Because we have been used to live where, if I want electricity, if I want to turn on the power, it's there. We will fight for that same electricity. And we need to learn how to manage it. And that, for me, is being smart. And if we are that, then we can continue having a nice symbiosis with the city. If we're not, we'll end up fighting for that electricity that the city, more than correctly so, would want to dedicate to the households. I mean, don't get me wrong, Pascal. Now in Gothenburg, it's not a major city. We're barely 1 million people, inhabitants in the metropole area. We are now talking about having rotating shutdowns in certain places because there is not enough electricity if the winter turns bad.
Yeah, this is the issue about scalability here. Yeah. But we're trying, right? We're discussing that early today. Just to switch in on smart and sustainable port cities, there is one interesting venture that you've been engaging, Mike, in LA with C40 cities. and especially Shanghai, and more recently announced also with Singapore about green corridor. It's interesting, but if you can explain to us what does that mean between the cities and the ports, what are you aiming at? Because we have been discussing corridors today, moving from landlord to corridors, logistic, but corridors. So I think now the corridor is not an inland or waterways corridor. We're talking Pacific corridor here.
Yes. Thank you for having me back on a panel today. And I'd like to, if I may, just address a little bit as well as what Pete and Over said. But, as the city of Los Angeles, we have, as I mentioned earlier, our own power supply that supplies the port. But what's interesting is last year, or actually this year, when we had over 100 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, the state of California told us to turn off our energy so that people could not plug in their cars. If you had a Tesla, you could not plug in your car between 4 and 8 p.m. There was a strain on the statewide grid, which is a big concern, because as more and more people move to the battery electric car, which is also a state mandate by the year 2035, that no new car being sold in the state of California can be gas powered. It has to be zero emission. So that's going to put a heavy strain on the state of California. So the state of California asked residents to shed power during certain hours of the day.
Right.
So that's going to be very interesting as we go to more and more of what zero emission climate is going to be needed. So we are looking, as I said, the city of Los Angeles produces its own power, looking at wind power as well as solar panels. The state of California is also looking at first ever offshore windmills, which is something that we've never had offshore of California. So they're actually implementing that as well. So we're going to start seeing windmills outside of the state of California. That'll be offshore, which is something we haven't had before. But to answer your question, and by the way, Pete, if Jens was here, I think he'd debate you on the beer, right? But I think to answer your question about the C40 cities have worked with Shanghai on decarbonizing between Shanghai and Los Angeles, Long Beach, the vessels that come en route. But not only the vessels, but the origin, what takes place at origin, what takes place at destination. So this is part of an effort to decarbonize that whole network. And actually, as you mentioned, Singapore reached out to us and said they want to participate in the same program. But the interesting thing and the great thing is that we have a number of shipping lines that want to participate, cargo owners that want to participate, and as you know, their efforts to reduce carbon emissions within their supply chain, this adds to that. So we have major importers that definitely want to sign on and participate in this. Now we have a number of ships that do come to the port that have LNG, but that was at one time a good approach, right? Now LNG is not good enough, and we may have to migrate into either methanol or ammonia.
We still don't know.
It's still unknown.
We're just learning.
Just learning, right?
Trying, right?
But that's what people are looking at possibly in that corridor. But so we want to try to implement what we can with the C40 by 2030. Begin implementation, and then by 2050. Have it completely decarbonized.
So where C40 has been existing for about 15 years or so,
Yes.
right? Were you the first one to move to that between Shanghai and LA on this corridor?
We were one of the groups that put that together, and that's through the help of our mayor, who at one time was the head of the C40 during that 1 year. But he asked for the Shanghai and LA being the biggest corridor, because obviously most of our cargo comes from Shanghai, looking at that and decarbonizing that.
Yeah, and the just-in-time arrival of ships is very important in this race, trans-Pacific race at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Yes, Alvir.
But I really love the idea, Mike, that you have with the corridors. And I think earlier too, we heard Martin from Montreal say that it's a way to break down a problem, and it's a way to think about a solution in a more narrow focus.
Yes.
What I fear, we also have signed, in Gothenburg, we have signed 2 of those agreements, one with Rotterdam, and in extension we hope to do it with Singapore as well, and we have signed one with Ghent. What I do fear is that we will wait until we find a perfect solution, 2048, to remove the carbon emissions in the corridor. What I would like to see, and what we are talking with our partners in these two cases, Rotterdam and Port of Ghent, is let's start taking small steps to start reducing the carbon emission. So even though if we cannot tomorrow go out to the market and say now it's carbon free, we can show that it's carbon reduced. As an example, you mentioned just in time. It's really important that we work on that on a digital scale so that the ships don't have to anchor for 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 hours emitting pollutions, right? Or that the terminals become emissions free and that they use LNG at least for part of the travel, even though if it's not the perfect example. Right. The goal is not to go from 100% emissions to zero. The goal is to do it incrementally and move the needle. So I just want to raise a flag there. Let's not be so black and white there to say that we wait until we have the perfect solution.
Yeah, I think that it's not only a 2030 issue. We need to be very pragmatic.
Exactly.
You know, we need to take some pain points that we can tackle on, right?
Yes.
Depending on type of vessel, of course, between a cruise ship and a tanker and a container ship, this is not the same business case, but...
And in these corridors, what I would love to see is, I mean, there's a handful of these corridors. Maybe tomorrow we'll have 100 of them. There will not be 1 million of them. That would defeat the purpose of having a green corridor. I would love if somebody set up a global, call it some kind of a measurement that says, here are the global 100 corridors that exist, and here's the reduced CO2 footprint for 23, for 24. Yes, we haven't eliminated it, but we have reduced 2%. Now it's at 7%, so that we as people and we as initiative takers, so that we can track it, because it comes down to basic managerial principles. What doesn't get measured doesn't get done. It's very easy for many of us to hide behind that contract and say 2050, that's when we'll figure this out.
Yeah, I think back at in Vancouver at World Port Conference, we were discussing about the next generation of ESI index, which is environmental shipping index, you know, at ports. What you're aiming at in this kind of KPIs is to go beyond and to go on corridor KPIs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so Elver brought up a good point. I mean, you can't go from 0 to 100 right away, but unfortunately we have some environmental groups that think you need to go that way. But you do need that transition point, and we're doing that with our on-road trucks. You know, you can't, because of our distance that people travel with the trucks, battery electric is very difficult to get to that destination. So an interim solution being, you know, LNG trucks to get us to that the interim point, and then eventually to the battery electric or hydrogen. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're testing both of those because of our distances that we go to the distribution centers and warehouses from the port.
Let's address another subject, and it's smart mobility. You know, you are doing very cool stuff in Antwerp, you know, with drones, transport over water. Is that happening?
Yeah, I think all of us suffer from most of truck-oriented sports. Also in Antwerp, still more than 50% of the cargo is coming in and out by truck. That has grown by history, and I think for most ports that's the case. Of course, we try to leverage railway, but that's not easy, big investments and so on, older technology. And I think in that way we strongly believe that bringing in new technology can leverage and change that. And indeed, 2 examples, I believe very much in smaller boats, also back again in relation to the city, like Bruges, very water-rich city, also Antwerp, you can, in the world, you can access deep into the cities with smaller boats, with zero emissions, electric motors, that's existing, very performant, they can operate for 12 hours. You can maybe even automate them to a certain level. So I think we should invest more in that, in bringing cargo, last mile deliveries with smaller boats into the city, but also with drones. And I know the legislation on that, and Amazon and some other big guys, they're working on that, and they try and they pull back, but sooner or later it will happen.
But not only cargo drones, also passenger drones, right?
Yeah, but that's probably a next step.
An helicopter.
Okay. I think there are a few companies in the world doing that. That's probably not before 26, 27. We will see the first people flying around in drones. But I think that the big gain you can is really package deliveries, having that last mile delivery from a port, because all ports are close located to that highly dense populated areas. And if you fly 2-3 kilometers with a drone, that's nothing. So in that way, take out traffic of the cities, take out congestion, and bring these smaller packages to the people. I think it will take a few years, but it will happen.
But smart mobility is really important.
Yeah.
You know, we're still in the age where
Yeah.
we don't want to give away the car.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, at some point we will.
That's changing.
Yeah, that's changing.
I have a few kids, and they are not very much interested.
care.
They don't care.
They don't care.
We've had Virgin Atlantic look at a Hyperloop system to get from the port to where the distribution centers are at. Very expensive, though. To do
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Hyperloop, but
Yeah,
that
a year
gets,
ago we got DPW was there also on
Yeah.
on their project as well. It's pretty much interesting as well. But on your side, Elvire, you are working on on the clean truck initiatives that you were mentioning earlier, but it's about green lanes also to facilitate the flow of trucks, right? So that's also an infrastructure dimension here.
No,
It's clean mobility, yeah.
yeah, absolutely, and it does go back to what we do has to not just create value, but we need to be able to ensure that the value can be captured. And thinking in these green lanes, thinking in these trucks and the business models, and then a green lane that carries the cargo on a ship to Ghent, it creates an opportunity for those that work in that system and that work in that supply chain to charge a premium. I like what Jens said earlier when we talked about Inditex. We need to start removing the word cheap from the entire conversation. We need to start thinking sustainable, which is not necessarily cheap. I mean, we hear on every of these COPE meetings, we hear the CEOs of big industry companies saying, I would love to pay 1-2% more freight charges on my total revenue and get them green. So I think the willingness is there. We just need to create a mode where they can capture it. And that we do with the green lanes, green trucks, end-to-end solutions. When we talk about smart mobility, I love that conversation. And that conversation for us goes, we are starting to implement a business model in Gothenburg where we say, if you use the assets, meaning the trucks, the rail, and the ships, if they're better utilized, you get a cheaper access to the port. You get less cost of handling the port. We even start to incentivize our own terminals. I'd rather have 800,000 TEUs that are filled and reused than have 1 million TEUs where 20% of them are empty and just, you know, walking around the port. We need to think about business models that create incentives for people to use and maximize the assets. I'd rather have one ship call that's fully optimized and fully utilized than have 3 ship calls where the ship leave my port half empty.
Yeah, it's clear, but it's clear also that from a trucker perspective, a trucking company perspective, you know, where should I go? Should I go hydrogen? Should I go electric? You know, it's a big investment in a truck.
It is.
You know, so you can have incentive at the same time. You know, it's like today, we were saying earlier, you have a scalability problem on electricity on electric cars. So what if you cannot drive your truck? You know, because of that issue, you know, of that supply. You know, it's not an easy one, right?
No, it's not. And that's what we talked about earlier, right? When we said that there could be a conflict of interest when we talk these new alternative energy, including electricity. Because if you can't charge your Tesla, that's your problem as a citizen and as a voter. But if you can't charge your truck, that's your problem as a business person, right? And you're a little company. And we got to remember that logistics is a defragmented industry. You have these small mom and pop shops that live off of this. They can't afford to buy a truck that they can run. They only make money as long as the truck runs. Which is why I do believe that we as sports, we can do stuff, real stuff. I'll give you an example of what we have done back home. So we've created infrastructure to ensure that the trucks can charge while they wait access to the port. We've created green lanes to make sure if you come with a green truck that you don't have to wait. You get priority access to the port. We have created financial incentives. But I would say the coolest thing that we have done is that we have mapped out where do these trucks go, the 1.2 million. And we found, mapping-wise, using data, that usually 90% of them, they go within 24 to 140 kilometers from the port. And we found these inland ports where we now provide our funds and our rights and our staff to build infrastructure so they can charge there as well.
Yeah.
Pascal, maybe, and I think we should not think too much in the context of today, because a lot of these new developments, electric cars, are rather new, and still a massive amount of development is happening. And there is a Dutch company who built a solar car, which is using 90% less electricity than a normal EV car today. Well, 90%, that's a big difference. And they say a car will become even an energy producer, like in Spain. Maybe not in the Netherlands or in Belgium, but in Spain, you put out your car and it can create energy because it has solar panels on it. I think also in the US, a company is working on that. So we should start thinking in that, because everybody say, yeah, the infrastructure will not be enough and things like that. But the market is still evolving so fast, technology is still evolving so fast, that within 3-4 years, it can be completely different. And that room is still present. And that's a great news, I think.
Yeah,
And
I agree. I agree. And yeah, go ahead.
So, Elver, like you said, the special lanes for the green trucks, that's something that we're also looking at as well. But in that green lane, you look at the inductive charging.
Exactly.
Right? So that inductive charging's in those lanes so that that driver can get the opportunity charging that he needs. Unfortunately, in the terminal, you can't do it all within the terminal, so you capture it in the one choke point to do that. So absolutely correct.
But this entire conversation becomes very technically savvy. Do you allow, induction charging? And we all have our solutions, and they're there. We're technically capable of fixing this problem if we look at it from a 1.2 or 2.2, or whatever the amount of million trucks we have. But the challenge, and you said it, Pascal, the challenge is still that this truck costs so much more. You had the example, Mike, in US. That we described the 150 versus 300 versus $1 million, right? And that's why I keep coming back to where we as ports need to figure out a way to create these business models and help in this transition. I'm not saying that we pay for the trucks. Every market stands on their own two legs, right? But we can help create these business models. We can help create access restrictions or access price differentials so that it becomes somewhat more financially sound for somebody to buy a truck for 300 or 500,000.
But of course, this discussion is a little tricky right now because of the skyrocketing price on electricity as well. And I understand that your target is to get at the port area 225 megawatts in the next 5 years.
You have a brilliant memory.
Yeah, and 10 times more than today, right?
Yeah.
So where are you going to get them? You still really need infrastructure, and it's about capex. Lots of capex.
So that is, I'm glad that you bring those numbers up, and to put them into context, right? The city that I'm from, the whole capacity is 800 megawatts. Today, the port uses about 20, to your point. With all that we plan to electrify, not within the coming 10, but within the coming 3 years, we will need 225 megawatts. Meaning we would need a large portion of what the city has. Again, coming to that conflict where we need to make sure that we use this electricity. And that's what a smart port is. Smart, using the resources that you need.
And you want to make sure, one of the other issues was not only did the Tesla not plug in between 4 and 8, they've asked the ports to unplug the ships.
Exactly.
And we didn't do that, luckily, at the City of Los Angeles because we have our own power, but other ports in California were asked to unplug the ships during those high heat times. You can't have that in the future. So
exactly. So to answer your initial question there, Pascal, our aim, and I see that as a necessity for all ports, access to own controlled and produced electricity within the port will be a key differential factor. And our aim is to produce at the very least 30, if not 40% of all that energy, the 225, or the electricity, by ourselves, so that we control the production, we control the supply, we control where it goes, so we are not dependent on the city grid.
Yeah, I think this is a strong message to all our audience today, because in all the panel that we had, so far today, we have been always talking about closing the gaps. We're talking about very advanced countries when it comes to energy transition, but most of the countries are not there.
Exactly.
Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, Southeast Asia, where they are struggling already today on producing electricity. But the key message is here to have the Port Authority engage in the energy transition to be an energy producer. You know, it's so. But closing the gap, it's a very important.
Absolutely.
We always go back to that story because we,
Yeah.
you know, we had asked, we had those questions today. But how? What about us? You know.
Yeah. And we're the market makers.
Yeah,
Sorry. Yeah.
We were a couple of months ago at the fact-finding mission in Tangimet
Yeah.
in Morocco with the chain ports. Greenfield development. But these guys, they are very close to being fully using renewable energy. I think there's a big Renault factory which is using biomass and windmills and things like that. So starting from a greenfield can also speed up a lot of that development. So I should not always, closing the gap is important, but sometimes it can also be an advantage.
But I think your message is absolutely right. I mean, look, at the end of the day, very few government cities will say, let's increase energy production because the port needs it. They usually make those decisions and infrastructure investments because there's a household need, there's a need for other type of industry that provides more job creations that necessarily a port does, right? So for that reason, I do believe that a port should definitely take the destiny into their own hands and say, you know what, we are going to be into energy production business, but to serve our own ecosystem, which is major difference to say we're going to produce energy to sell it to somebody versus we're going to produce energy to service our ecosystem, our customers, and drive that agenda.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to change the subject discussion here because we have been on energy transition and there are lots to be said, but we have other subject matter. As far as S2PC are concerned, there was very interesting fact happening during the pandemic in LA, where Gene Sirica, your CEO, was appointed as Chief Logistics Officer for the city of Los Angeles. It's an amazing story in a very hard time, but it was the way to go, right?
Yes, yes, and there was a huge demand for obviously PPEs. You know, the hospitals were short of gloves and masks and a number of things. So Gene, with his experience being with APL for over 25 years, the mayor called on him to be the chief logistics officer. And what his role was to bring in these goods, get them through the port, because a lot of them came from Asia, and bring them through the port and get them distributed out to the hospitals. So Gene was tasked with that. In addition, he ended up working with U.S. companies to have it manufactured in the U.S. because just what was coming in imported was not enough. But then we also brought in our port optimizer as a tool to help manage that. You know, the interesting thing was, well, first I'll say that was used to manage it, to know where the cargo is at, to get it distributed out, and then use it as an inventory control system within the port as well, because we stored them at the port before we distributed them out to the hospital. What was interesting is that, you know, you tell people to flag your container as being PPE, right? So tell us it's going to be gloves, tell us it's going to be masks. But then you were getting people that were saying, oh, I want my cargo, right? So I'm going to say it's a mask. I'm going to say it's gloves just to get it through the system faster. So we kind of caught on to those folks that tried to do that. So we had to make sure it was controlled, that it was just the folks that definitely needed the stuff for the hospitals. And then Gene was tasked to get them out to the hospitals. He assembled a number of staff members to call up hospitals to say, what is it that you need? To make sure that you put in your order. Go on into the system, say how many you need of certain items, and then we'll distribute it out to you. We're still doing it as of today. The need is not as great, but we have the warehouse that's storing it, and we are still doing the distribution of that and using the port optimizer as a tool.
Oh, that's interesting to know that it's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah, this initiative as well. I think it's on the lesson learned of that, you know, for all our ports around the world, you know, being chief logistics officer for the city in terms of crisis.
Yes.
We're discussing with Jens Mayer about crisis-proof requirement. You know, it's a good practice to remember, right?
And we thank a few shipping lines too that were partners in this, where they helped bring that cargo in and making sure it was top stowed on a ship, expedited, so that when it came off, it went out to the people in need.
In Antwerp, there is a great thing that you have developed the last years with Apica, your digital twin, at the beginning to serve the port needs, right? But now it's going beyond to the city as well.
Yeah, indeed, and I think COVID has shown, despite all misery, the importance of ports as being logistic hubs, also towards the cities, of course. But this morning I was walking around in the exhibition, Smart City exhibition. I was a bit surprised that actually so few technologies and startups are making that connection to ports from the city, and probably the other way around. So it's really good we are here, and I think we should talk with a loud voice, saying, hey guys, we need to work closer together, because of course a lot of things are happening in the field, but it can be much more things. And indeed we try to use our digital twin, which was started. It's about situation awareness. It's not about simulation. How will the port or the city look within 20 years? No. What's happening today in the port? I think on security, on safety, and that's operational use today. So we have 10 use cases running. We brought in the port of Zeebrugge into that environment. So there we have the static data together with the real-time data from different sensors, cameras, other sensors, drones. And now we're looking how we can combine that with all the data which is available in the city, and see how we can create one database there to have just a more easy management, not somebody looking to 25 screens, what's happening now. No, to have really an intelligent system which is focused and giving specific relevant information. There is something happening. There is a critical situation, there is an explosion, there's an incident, and people can react much faster. There is an oil spill happening. The authorities can react much faster because they have an eye in the sky, see what's happening in the field. So the response time will increase a lot, and I think in that way I'm sure that the safety will increase also, and just the efficiency of the port and the city operations will.
Yeah, but it's an interesting platform, because like in defense, it could become also a command and control systems for security as well.
Yes, of course.
Safety and security.
Yeah, indeed. And we have some issues with illegal goods coming into the port in Western Europe, also in Antwerp. So we have to keep an eye on that and hold on and watch on that. But of course, yeah, we need to take the privacy regulations and all of that in consideration, that's for sure.
Mike, you were talking about the Port Optimizer initiative that you launched back in 2016 after the strikes, but yes, you got really in the West Coast where you were a silo between all together. And Elvire, I understand that you are moving also to Port Optimizer. I think it's one good thing to be chain port.
Absolutely.
And you're very close to in that. Can you tell us what you're doing there on Port Optimizer and the lesson learned from LA?
Yeah, so we really enjoyed how Port of LA decided to use the Port Optimizer. It was, Mike, help me out here, but it is basically a tool designed to increase transparency in order to increase efficiency of logistics. And it doesn't just show you where the cargo is while it's in the port, it is also showing you as the ships are approaching, so you can actually look deeper. The upside, this is not new technology. It's not. It's been around in the logistics industry for 2 decades. The upside is you use one platform as a BCO. You don't need to look at which carrier am I using, which forwarder am I using, what trucking company. You go into the Port of LA and then view. Now, having sold enough from a LA perspective, yeah, what we decided to do with it is basically to do a replica of what Port of LA has done. But we have also decided to add rail connections and what we call triangulating. So basically, the Port Optimizer that's live and it's expanding back home, aside from being able to see where the goods are on the way to the port from the seaside and where's the container while in the port, we have also attached through the Transport Ministry data points throughout the national railway throughout Sweden. So you can track your container, your unit, while it's moving on rail by looking in the port. And then you can also view how many empty containers are there in the middle rural areas of Sweden. We're a large exporting nation. Mm-hmm. Our biggest exporting commodity is forest. Forest grows in the rural area. So having knowledge on how many existing containers are empty in my vicinity, that provides efficiency. So actually, Port Optimizer, what we hope with it, we hope to actually ship less containers, but those we ship, they should be full.
Yeah, the thing is, there from an LA perspective or Gothenburg perspective is that the platform, which is kind of port commuter systems, also move to regional or nationwide.
Sure.
You can have the corridor, rail, and trucks and inland depots and all that, but not only also business process automation, because here you are more on the visibility through track and trace, but also in going to, collaborating with with the private sector on process automation, right?
Absolutely, and if I just may add, so track and trace, again, that's a hygiene factor.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's not a value add in itself. It's when you decide and when you have enough aggregated data, when you can start to work in a predictable manner. It is when you have enough aggregated data that you can allow the market to know that there will be 80 empty containers there. So you don't need to call 80 empty from the port. You can use them in that zip code because there's already. That's where it becomes real value add to the BCOs.
Yeah, and I think, Pascal, the other thing was you have everybody in their own little silos, right? You have the trucking community, you have the chassis providers, you have the rail carriers, all in their own little silos, shipping lines as well. And so what we developed here was 14 days in advance, because that's usually the transit time from Asia. 14 days in advance, now we know what's coming in. So now the rail carriers can be prepared for having the rail cars in place, chassis providers having the chassis in place. But more importantly, the truck driver did not know about his cargo until the day before, go pick it up. So now the cargo owner can nominate who, they can say, my trucking company is X. They have visibility to all my containers. Now that trucking company can look at containers for Walmart, look at containers for Target, look at containers for Home Depot, all in one spreadsheet, so that they don't have to rely on their cargo owner to tell them which containers they have. They open up the port optimizer, and it gives all the list of containers that trucking company needs to pick up for multiple cargo owners. So that's one of the major benefits of this as well. Because the trucking community was very last minute, if you will.
Yeah.
Probably similar to what you have there.
So we're going at the end of this session. Can I ask you, each of you, one question only, for the audience, and again, in closing the gaps with our colleagues from other regions of the world who are less advanced in sustainable and smart port city. If you have one recommendation, where should you start when you are not there yet, when you have not think about it, from a smart and sustainable port city? Pete?
I think the topic we have not been discussing is about the talent. I think because at the end it's a people business, and you see Europe and US, we have the war on talent, and that will not pass by. And I think one of the key elements of a smart port is having digital talent present in your port. And for that, I think it's so important to work closely with the communities around your port and educating people, promoting the port, make it attractive, because for a lot of people, perception is not always that good. So really, please work hard, work very close together with your communities, because you will need the people there to build your port.
Yeah, I think capacity building is paramount indeed. And we introduced during the different session today the digital playbook about the workforce.
Yes.
And tomorrow we have a specific session led by Fantian from Dunsong from Port of Hamburg on this matter. We're going to cover with US Coast Guard the building the workforce on cybersecurity, which is in the US you miss about almost 1 million people on cybersec, protection. So, Mike, going back to the question, where do we start? Where should you start?
I think we all have the same common goal, right? Everybody wants to be more efficient at the port. Everybody wants to be more sustainable, right? Well, all the same goals. So we all need to work together, and I think that's what we did with our chain port efforts, was working together on the digitization, but also looking at it globally. Everybody's got the same goal, so I think we all have to work together.
Yeah, collaboration.
Yeah, collaboration.
Elvire.
I would urge a port to define who is my customer. And soon the emergence of how do I create value to that customer will come along, both when we talk about efficiency, digitalization, smart ports. But who is my customer, I would argue, is the most important thing to answer. I'll give you a practical...
So it's still a tricky one, right?
It is because as a port, many of us tend to view different portfolios of customers. Some say that the terminal operators are customers because there is a financial exchange of monetary means between Port Authority and the terminal operators. Some say it's the shipping line, some say it's the warehouse holder, some say it's... I think the key is to define who is my ultimate customer and how do I create value for them. That's when we start to play in a broader field.
But do we agree on this matter that we have so much to tackle?
Yes.
On sustainability, on resilience, that thinking only about one customer is not enough, but to have a coalition of willing where we got the cargo owners. Sometimes we are directly dealing with them, sometimes we don't, because we let the shipping line or the terminal operator. But I think it's time to have a coalition of willing where we have the cargo owners, the shipping line, the terminal operator, ourselves, and others around the table to addressing that situation. Because when you said, BCO has to pay for it. So we need to have the BCO for, from day one in the room. If it's not there, it's, do we agree on this, that we need to be all together?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think even during our supply chain issues that we had on the West Coast, the federal government brought together all the ports, the shipping lines, the cargo owners all in one meeting to start talking about how we can improve the supply chain during these tough times.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. We've been very pleased to talk about S2PCs today, Sustainable and Smart Port City, Chain Port members. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Elvire, great to have you on board, right?
So many thanks, Elvire, Mike, Piet, and of course, again and again and again, Pascal. Tomorrow you will be able to continue with 8 more panel sessions throughout the day from this same platform, or you can also assist if you're in Barcelona to the stand we have at the Smartport City Expo World Congress, stand E161 at the Pavilion 2. Well, we have sadly come to the end of this Smartport Spears of the Future 2022. I hope you've enjoyed the panel sessions, the videos, and the project spotlights, and I would like to thank our speakers and moderators for sharing their thoughts, their knowledge, and their time with us. And also, of course, I would like to thank you, our audience. Almost 4,000 people connected in this platform, Smartports TV, during the day. So thank you, people connected from all over the world. Thank you again. And also to this wonderful human and professional team, Smartports 2022. Thank you, everyone, for making this possible, for working all together to still design more innovative, sustainable, and inclusive ports. We've talked about energy transition, sustainability, digitalization, cybersecurity, the blue economy, blue acceleration, the America's Cup 2024, collaboration between ports and cities, and many other topics. And we hope this has been a pleasant forum for you. As for me, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure hosting this event for the 3rd consecutive year. Thank you. Let's continue all together sticking to share experiences that allow the design of more innovative, sustainable, and inclusive ports around the world. We say goodbye from this wonderful city bathed by the Mediterranean that will host the America's Cup 2024, the 37th edition, Barcelona. Stay here because we will be broadcasting from the Smart City Expo World Congress. And thank you, everyone. See you soon. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.